Hello, beautiful people. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope you are just having the most fantastic week of all time and that your week only gets better from here on out. If you haven't seen this face before, my name is Liz, and I quite often like to sit in this chair and talk about all kinds of things like true crime, weird moments in history, unsolved mysteries, all that kind of jazz. So if that sounds like something that might be interesting to you, then please hit subscribe and we can just be like the bestest of friends ever if you want. And if you don't want, we're best friends now. If you have seen this face before, then welcome back. Thank you so much for choosing to voluntarily hang out with me. That's so nice. I really appreciate it. As usual, of course, I have my supervisor / production manager / real star of the show with me, Lily Girl, editing Liz. You know the deal, switch to Lilycam. It's a stormy day today and Lily is a little bit scared of storms. She's feeling a little bit insecure, a little bit on edge. So if you hear noise disturbances, it's her. She's probably shaking like a fuzzy maraca, but I swear, Lily is fine. She's fine. Right, Lily? She's fine. Today we're talking about the curious, unsolved disappearance of a young man named Charlie Allen Jr. to some and Neo Babson Maximus to others. And yes, that is two completely different names. Don't worry. I'll explain later. This case is pretty captivating. There's a lot of twists and turns, and it received a bit of media attention, but not a lot, which I find surprising considering how bizarre the disappearance really was. Like, I was gripped while researching this case. I was really dragged right in from the get-go. So I think it deserves a bit more attention. So if you guys are ready and I'm ready, I think we should just dive right in. Charles Allen Jr., or Charlie as he was known to his friends and family, was born on the 26th of April 1985 to his parents Charles Sr. and Anne. He was their eldest child and he had two younger siblings named Brittany and Brendan. Charlie was described as a really sweet, happy kid, and he was also very smart. He could get top grades at school with very little to zero effort on his part. As an adult, Charlie stood 6 feet tall, had light brown hair, brown eyes, and he had a bit of that jock look about him. At the time of his disappearance in 2007, he was 22 years old. His hair was cut very short, almost shaved, and he was last seen wearing black sweatpants with a red line down the side, a long-sleeved white t-shirt with the words 2007 US Open on the front, and tennis shoes. Today, he would be 35 years old. Now, Charlie was a very interesting guy. He could be good at anything and everything he decided he wanted to be good at. He was that kind of person that would get tunnel vision when cycling through different hobbies. Like, he would spend all of his waking hours mastering one hobby or interest or skill and then just move on to the next. In the early 2000s, when he was in high school, Charlie became famous amongst the online gaming community by at one point becoming the #1 player in the world of the game Half-Life. His sister Brittany would have people come up to her, approach her asking if she was Neo's little sister, Neo being the gamer tag that Charlie used in the game. Borrowed, of course, from Keanu Reeves' character in one of Charlie's favorite films, The Matrix. Charlie was really admired, almost idolized by other gamers, and he had articles written about him and his gaming achievements. When asked for advice from other players, he said, if you wanted to be good at something, you had to become addicted to it. When he graduated high school, Charlie started attending the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, or UMass Dartmouth as it was known. At the time of his disappearance, he was a senior studying psychology and he was addicted to a new hobby, tennis. And he approached this hobby just like every other hobby he had in his life with an almost obsessive intensity, spending all of his spare time practicing and improving his skill. And he was really good. He made it onto the college men's tennis team, and he even had dreams of one day becoming a world famous professional tennis player. He was so invested in this dream, in fact, that Charlie made quite an interesting decision leading up to his disappearance. See, Charlie felt that his name, Charles Allen Jr., was just way too boring for a world-famous professional tennis player. So he had it legally changed to Neo Babson Maximus about 2 months prior to when he went missing. Quite an interesting choice, yes, but to give this name some meaning and some explanation, Neo, of course, was his gamer tag from Half-Life. Babson was his paternal grandmother's maiden name, and Maximus was the name of his favorite movie character of all time from Gladiator. Now, when I said Charlie was smart, it was pretty much the understatement of the year. Charlie was scarily intelligent. Some people even said he had a photographic memory. One of his friends, Anthony, said that if you gave Charlie a credit card and let him look at it for a few seconds, he would know that credit card number off by heart from that point on. And to add another layer to this, Charlie could also be very charismatic and very persuasive. He once convinced a bank clerk to accept a credit card number, even though he had no other ID on him whatsoever, and he was allowed to access that account. Now, it's unclear whether this was his account, but seeing as he had no criminal record, I'm going to assume it was. All I'm saying is that Charlie was a very capable and intelligent individual. So although Charlie could be a little bit intense, a little bit serious if you didn't know him that well, to those who loved him, to his friends and family, he was the life of the party. He was goofy, he liked to have fun, and he liked to make sure that those around him were having fun. His family was really close-knit as well, especially him and his sister Brittany. They were only a year apart and they were in contact basically every day, if not every couple of days. On the day he went missing, Thursday the 11th of October 2007, Charlie was supposed to meet up with his dad for lunch, but this lunch got cancelled. So he instead had tennis practice with one of his good friends, Mason, who was also on the men's tennis team. After practice, Charlie and Mason went to the college cafeteria and had some pizza, and Charlie told Mason that he had been invited to a party that night by someone on the women's tennis team, and he invited Mason to come along. Mason was keen, and the two parted ways so that Mason could drive home and get ready for the party that night. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary or out of place to Mason at all, but when he arrived back at the college at about 8 p.m., the time that he and Charlie had arranged to meet back up, Charlie was nowhere to be found. Mason tried calling Charlie, but the call went through to voicemail. So after waiting around for about an hour and a half, he turned around and went back home, assuming that Charlie had gone to the party without him. But Charlie never showed up at the party. Sometime after 8 p.m., Charlie's sister Brittany logged onto Facebook to respond to a message that Charlie had sent her earlier. But when she tried to reply, she realized that she couldn't because Charlie's Facebook account had been deactivated. Confused, she called Charlie and a really weird conversation took place. Brittany asked Charlie, why he had deleted his Facebook account, and she says that Charlie was just instantly spooked and panicked and just wasn't making much sense at all. Charlie said that he hadn't deleted his Facebook account, that someone else must have. And when Brittany asked him, who would want to do that, Charlie said that he had sent some emails that had gotten him into trouble with some very important people, and that those people were now after him and he didn't feel safe. He said that there was a chance that Brittany was also in danger and that she should leave school immediately, that only God could protect her. Throughout the phone call, Charlie sounded like he was out of breath, like he was running. And the last thing he said to Brittany was that if he went missing, the answer to his disappearance could be found in the periodic table of elements. After that, the call disconnected. Brittany, obviously scared and worried for her brother, immediately tried calling Charlie back, but the call just went through to voicemail. His phone had been switched off. Brittany then called her dad to tell him that Charlie was acting strangely and that she was concerned for him, but Her dad was already concerned for Charlie. See, Charlie had left voicemails with both his mum and his dad with messages sounding like they were saying goodbye. In the message he left his dad, he said he wanted to go somewhere warm, like Florida or Mexico. In the voicemail he left his mum, though, he said that he was going to move to Texas. In this voicemail, he also said he felt like he needed to be loved more and that he felt isolated. And right after he mentioned feeling isolated, the call dropped out. In both of these messages, Charlie again sounded like he was running. His parents, of course, tried calling him back, but Charlie's phone had been turned off and all calls after this point went straight to voicemail. If you're already getting a little bit confused and a little bit creeped out, there is more, just wait. The last confirmed sighting of Charlie was a little bit after 3 a.m. that same night when a lady by the name of Jean Trudeau, who lived about a 7-minute drive or a half-hour walk from the college campus, woke to find a shirtless and shoeless Charlie climbing through a window of the second floor of her house. Jean was obviously startled and frightened, but she confronted Charlie, asking him what exactly he thought he was doing. And Charlie was super polite. He apologized for startling her and asked her if Mason was there. Jean said, "No, Mason doesn't live here," and Charlie apologized again, backed out of the window, leapt down off the roof and ran shirtless and shoeless into the freezing night into the woods that surrounded the house. To make this even weirder, Charlie knew exactly where Mason lived. Mason lived on the other side of the campus, about half an hour from Jean Trudeau's house. When police were notified of Charlie's disappearance, an intensive ground search took place, including bloodhounds and other canine units, and also an aerial search took place as well of the woods that Charlie had run into and the surrounding areas. But these searches turned up nothing. No Charlie, no body, not even any evidence that he had been there at all. On Sunday, the 14th of October, police were called to a house on Slocum Road in Dartmouth, where the homeowners had found a backpack in their backyard. And the backpack was found to be Charlie's after a notebook with his name on it was found inside the bag. There was nothing really of note in the bag, just typical things you'd expect of a college student. And his shoes were later found on Chase Road in Dartmouth. I'm going to pop a map up now to show you guys where all these locations were so you can kind of get an idea of Charlie's movements that night. Charlie started here at UMass Dartmouth. His shoes were found along the side of this road, Chase Road, so he must have taken these off pretty early, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me if he was running. Firstly, it was a cold October night, so the ground most likely would have been painfully cold. And secondly, personally, if I was running outside and running like my life depended on it, like Charlie seemed to think that his did, the last thing I would be doing is taking my shoes off. Like, is that just me, or do you guys think that as well? It's one thing for Charlie to take off his shirt. I mean, it was a cold night, but he was running. He might have felt warm, but taking off his shoes, it just is so strange. Moving on, Charlie's backpack was found in someone's backyard on this road here, Slocum Road. And finally, Jean Trudeau's house, where Charlie broke in at around 3 a.m. is on College Lane, just here. Now, if you thought things couldn't get any stranger, you of course would be 100% wrong. Police found Charlie's 1999 blue Ford Expedition abandoned in the campus parking lot. And inside the car was a pillow and a blanket, as though instead of living in his off-campus apartment, Charlie had been living in his car. Police also went to search Charlie's laptop to find if they could find any information about where Charlie possibly could have gone. But when they went to do this, the laptop had been wiped. The only information they could get from the laptop was that after it had been wiped, someone had visited the webpage for the University of Texas. Police, of course, called the university, but no enrollments or inquiries had been made for a Charlie Allen Jr. or for a Neo-Babs and Maximus. As well as the extensive ground and air searches, police also conducted searches and inquiries at local homeless shelters and hotels, but nothing ever came of these searches either. There were tips rung into police and news stations and radio stations about sightings of Charlie at Dartmouth Mall and Walmart, even as far as Melrose, which was an hour-and-a-half drive away. Charlie had lived there previously with his family, but nothing ever came of these sightings either. Now, there is something I haven't mentioned about Charlie yet, and this is something that wasn't known to a lot of people outside of his family and close friends, but when this information was made known to police, it had a big impact on the investigation. See, Charlie suffered from bipolar disorder and had experienced manic episodes in the past. Charlie's parents said that his bipolar had caused issues in the family, but that it was mostly kept under control with medication, and that 99% of the time he lived a totally normal life and no one would really know unless they were told. Now, while those that suffer from bipolar quite often experience manic highs and manic lows, Charlie experienced lows, but he was mostly affected by the manic highs. Charlie's dad said that in high school, they were able to keep tabs on him and make sure he was taking his medication, but once he left home and started going to college, this became all but impossible. Charlie told his sister Brittany that he hated taking his medication, that it made him feel dead inside, like he couldn't be sad or happy. So Charlie stopped taking his medication the summer before he went missing and was instead attempting to self-manage his bipolar with physical activity. Now, I looked into this, and yes, of course, exercise can have a mood-boosting effect due to the endorphins released during physical activity. But there have been at least 2 studies done on the effect of exercise on those that have bipolar, and both of these studies found that exercise can have an exacerbating effect on the manic symptoms that come with bipolar and can cause a sort of spiraling effect. And when you think of all the tennis Charlie was playing and the fact that he wasn't taking his medication, this could have been a recipe for disaster. So when police found out that Charlie was bipolar and he wasn't taking his medication, they just worked on the assumption that he had experienced a manic episode and didn't really look into any other explanations for his disappearance. They assumed Charlie was alive, with Dartmouth Police Captain Scott Brooks saying that people who are in a manic state pretty much run off pure adrenaline. So if Charlie had run off into the freezing cold, into the woods, underdressed, he actually had a higher chance of survival if he wasn't in his right frame of mind. But Charlie's family have voiced their opinion multiple times that they don't think a manic episode was to blame for his disappearance. Brittany, his sister, has said that in the past, leading up to one of Charlie's episodes, there would be signs and symptoms that would clue the family into something being up. But Brittany saw him just a few days before he went missing, when Charlie drove to Rhode Island to meet Brittany and their mum Anne for lunch. And both of them said that Charlie was really happy, acting really normally. He was really happy with how his study was going, how tennis was going. He was seeing someone new, and neither of them could think of anything in his life at that point that would have triggered a manic episode. But these accounts clash with some of the things that one of Charlie's best friends, Anthony Costanzo, has to say. Charlie lived with Anthony the summer before he went missing, that same summer that he stopped taking his medication. And this summer seems to be a period of great changes that were going on in Charlie's life. During this time, Charlie seemed to have found a new obsession, Scientology, and he talked about Scientology a lot. He was specifically fixated on the church's anti-psychology teachings, which was really interesting considering he was studying psychology. The Church of Scientology has a very controversial view on mental illness and the treatment of mental illness. Basically that neither of those exist. They have actively promoted conspiracy theories that psychiatrists were behind 9/11, and they teach their members that psychiatry is a form of torture. They're so invested in their beliefs that they have found the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, or the CCHR, which actively fights to end the medical model of mental illness and eliminate the rights of even non-Scientologists to access medication and therapy for their mental illness. According to Scientologists, antidepressants and mood stabilizers and the like are all just one big money-making scheme created by the pharmaceutical industry, that these drugs might make you feel like you're getting better and that you're improving, but that it's just a placebo effect that's taking place because, like I said, they believe there's no such thing as mental illness, so technically there's no ailment to treat. Looking at this from Charlie's point of view, especially when he had expressed how much he hated taking his medication, you can absolutely understand how this would have piqued his interest and he could have been drawn in. This would have been exactly what he wanted to hear, and it starts to make sense why he stopped taking his medication and he became so obsessed with tennis if this was something he was trying to use to manage his bipolar. Charlie's friend Anthony also said that Charlie adopted a very strange sleeping pattern around this time. Charlie would take naps throughout the day and night, every 4 or so hours, and never for more than 2 hours at a time. He might wake up at 8 a.m., have a half-hour nap around 11, go play tennis, and then have another nap around 4 p.m. for an hour and a half, and then just continue this throughout the night. And despite Charlie's family saying that Charlie was acting completely normally leading up to his disappearance, Anthony said that Charlie's behavior was getting more and more erratic. Anthony said that one day Charlie invited him to the Boston Open, which makes sense. Charlie was really into tennis, but the Open had already started and Charlie and Anthony didn't have tickets. So Anthony declined. But Charlie drove to Boston pretty much in the middle of the night, it sounds like, and slept on a park bench outside the arena where the Open was taking place, and then snuck in when they were letting people into the Open. And there were day sessions and night sessions. So that he could go to both, after the day session, he would hide for hours in the bathrooms so that he was already inside the arena when the night session would begin. In another event, Charlie, Brittany, and their mum went to another tennis event at Rhode Island, and afterwards, Charlie decided that he didn't want to go home. And his mum and sister were like, well, the event's over, Charlie, it's time to go. And Charlie literally leapt out of a moving car and ran off. He called Anthony and told him what had happened and said that he was hiding in some bushes by the road. And if Anne and Brittany called, to not tell them where he was hiding. Anne and Brittany were obviously scared and frightened. Charlie had just leapt out of a moving car and run off. They had no idea where he had gone. They called Anthony, and Anthony originally was like, guys, don't worry, it's just Charlie being Charlie. I'm sure he'll turn up eventually. But when he realized how frantic they really were, he gave up Charlie's hiding spot so they could find him. Charlie left Anthony a voicemail on the way home saying that he was pretty pissed that Anthony had ratted him out to his mum and his sister, and that he had planned when he became a world-famous tennis player to buy Anthony a Viper, but that wasn't going to happen anymore. Bye. That was his voicemail. So taking into account all of Charlie's weird behavior leading up to going missing, it becomes a more likely scenario that a manic episode was to blame for his disappearance. This is obviously how police felt. They didn't really look into any other possible scenarios. They pretty much threw up their hands and said, well, the guy had bipolar and he wasn't on his meds. What do you expect? I'm sure a lot of you are assuming that Charlie never made it out of those woods. And yes, a lot of people do believe that he died of exposure and that his body was just never found. And I mean, I could believe that if this was the tragic end that found Charlie, there is a chance that his body was just never found in the ground and air searches that took place after he went missing. But just shy of the first anniversary of Charlie's disappearance, something happened that would prompt another massive search. At around 4 a.m., a man named Stephen and his wife were sleeping soundly in their house about 7 miles from the UMass Dartmouth campus when they awoke to a loud knock on their door. When Stephen opened the door, there was a man on their doorstep that he later described as disheveled and severely underdressed for the weather. The man told Stephen he needed assistance and asked him if he could help him get him back to SMU, which was an old acronym for UMass Dartmouth. Stephen told the man to wait and went inside to call police, but when police arrived, the man was nowhere to be found. When Stephen was talking about this strange incident to one of his friends a few days later, his friend brought up the disappearance of Charlie from a year earlier. And when Stephen later went home and looked up photos of Charlie, he became 100% convinced that the man at his door had been Charlie. What followed was the largest civilian-led search that had taken place in the New England area. So we are talking a lot of people searching the woods surrounding the college campus, and there were bloodhounds involved, cadaver dogs, and other canine units. There was a set of bones found on the third day, but these bones were found to be that of a deer, not a human. So, I mean, I could understand Charlie not being found in one of these big, massive searches, but in two big, massive searches, it just makes it that much more unlikely that Charlie never made it out of the woods. And there is one more unconfirmed sighting of Charlie that just opens up a whole bunch of other possibilities to consider. A few weeks after Charlie disappeared, a man named Jim Costco came forward to police who said that on the morning of Saturday the 13th of October, he was on his way to work and he had seen a shirtless, disheveled man on the side of the road attempting to hitch a ride with a truck driver on Route 6 in Dartmouth. So it's entirely possible that Charlie made it out of those woods and made it out of Dartmouth in general, and that's why he was never found. Charlie did say in those voicemails that he wanted to move, and if he really believed that important people were after him, it makes sense that he would want to flee and get away as far as possible from Dartmouth. It also opens up the chilling possibility that Charlie met with foul play, either at the hands of this truck driver that he was trying to hitch a lift from, or by some other unknown person at whatever location he ended up at. But police never investigated this possibility. They were adamant that Charlie's disappearance was not the result of foul play. If Charlie did make it out of Dartmouth, there's also the sad chance that if he wasn't in his right frame of mind, Charlie ended up far away from home, far away from his family, with no idea how to get back home or where home even was. Without assistance, he might have become part of the homeless population of whatever town or city he ended up in. One thing Anthony has said has always kind of niggled at me, and when you take into account how brilliant and clever Charlie was, it takes on even more significance. Anthony said that if anyone had the survival skills and the know-how to get away and stay away, it was Charlie. And when you think about all the little strange details of Charlie's disappearance, and you have in your mind this idea that it was all a grand scheme of his to vanish into thin air, you can't help feeling like it was this big riddle that he's crafted and that he's sitting back waiting for someone to solve it. For instance, the periodic table of elements reference he made to his sister, There are 13 states in the US whose abbreviations appear in the periodic table. Was he trying to tell Brittany that these are one of the states he was going to be moving to, but he felt he had to do it in a cryptic way because the important people who were after him were listening in on the phone call and he didn't want them to know where he was headed? And the visit to the University of Texas website. Someone had gone to the effort to totally wipe Charlie's laptop, to delete all of his emails and delete his Facebook account. Why was this the one piece of information that was left readily available to find? It feels intentional, like the person that left it was pointing those looking for Charlie in the direction of Texas. But why? Was it a red herring left by Charlie? Did he intentionally leave confusing and conflicting voicemails? Did he do a search for the University of Texas to point his family in the wrong direction to Texas, either for their own protection or to ensure that he would never be found? Something else to consider is whether Charlie's involvement in Scientology went beyond just the keen interest he had displayed in their anti-psychology teachings. What about the emails that had gotten him in trouble with important people that he told his sister about? Were these important people part of the Church of Scientology? The Church of Scientology is a powerful cult, really, that on more than one occasion has been accused of stalking, kidnapping, false imprisonment, human trafficking, and murder. Did Charlie accidentally step on someone's toes and end up becoming a victim when the church decided he needed silencing? Or did he maybe instead willingly join the church and move to Florida to undergo training at the Church of Scientology's flag building, otherwise known as the Superpower Building? Seriously, all of the possible explanations for Charlie's disappearance are endless once you start looking into this case. Charlie's family believe that he did make it out of those woods and hope that he started a new life somewhere. His dad said that they don't like to consider the other possibilities. Charlie's bank cards and his credit cards were never found, and the accounts linked to these cards were never used after he vanished. His phone and his phone charger were also never found, and this is really interesting. While Charlie's phone was switched off the night that he disappeared, 2 days later, the phone was switched back on. His family would call the phone and it would ring before going to voicemail. And it was this way for months, meaning that someone had to be charging the phone. There were never any outbound phone calls made from the phone, and the calls that the family made to the phone were never answered. They just went to voicemail after the phone had rung out. And the family contacted the phone company, but they were told that the phone couldn't be traced, which doesn't make sense to me. Even though it was 2007, surely if the phone was on, it would have been pinging at whatever cell tower it was close to. And I can't find any information on whether police ever attempted to trace Charlie's phone. On the 3rd of January this year, the partial remains of an aged human male skull was found protruding from the sand on Little Beach in Dartmouth, but there has been no information released on whether they have been able to determine if the skull belonged to Charlie. Charlie is still a missing person. If you have any information on his whereabouts or his disappearance, please use the contact information I have placed in the description below. And that is all the information I have for you guys on this case. And it was a lot. That was a lot of information. Your mind is probably reeling, but please leave a comment down below on what you think happened to Charlie, what you think became of him, or if there's another theory that you've heard of. I seriously get so nerdily excited when someone leaves a comment on one of my videos. It makes my whole day. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really, as usual, appreciate it. Lily, would you like to come say bye? Are you okay? Are you hungry? Oh, jeez Louise. Are you okay? Are you surviving the storm? Hey, is it all okay? Oh, she's gone. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to hit like, and I will see you next time. Bye.